He knew the whole truth before she ever said a word. Her father's scandal, her ruined name, every whisper the town had to offer. He knew it all, and he still opened that gate. The question isn't whether she deserved a second chance. The question is, could she believe she did? This is the story of a woman who had to fall face down in the mud before she could finally decide to stay. Welcome to a channel built on the soul of the West Cowboys and consequences, love earned the hard way, and the quiet courage of ordinary people. What this story gives you, the truth that being believed in, before you believe in yourself, can be the thing that saves you. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one.
Abigail Turner. When the stagecoach door creaked open, Abigail Turner's boots touched the dry Texas ground. She held on tight to the letter from Harold Meeks of Dusty Creek, Texas, the man she was supposed to marry. And she searched the depot for the man from the description, tall with fair hair and kind eyes. But nobody was there waiting for her. The driver just tossed her traveling bag onto the dirt, and he was long gone before that dust had a chance to settle. A clerk was standing in the doorway of the telegraph office, with tobacco stains on his chin. He glanced down at the letter she was holding, then quickly looked away. "Are you the one for Meeks?" she heard him ask. "I am," she said. He spit a brown stream into the road and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "The fever got him last Tuesday, and they put him in the ground on Wednesday." He paused for a moment. "They do not give your money back for the ticket." "Ma'am, I am sorry for your troubles." The letter crumpled inside her fist. She reached down into her pocket. 14 cents. It was not enough to buy a bite to eat. It was not enough to send a message back home. Not that she had anyone in Ohio who would even reply. If this story is reaching you today, I would sure love to know where you are listening from. Sometimes the finest company is just knowing there is someone else out there with a hot cup of coffee and a good story. Go on and leave a comment to say hello. It means more than you might think. 4 miles. That is what the sign said, 4 long miles. The sole of Abigail's left shoe gave out somewhere after the 2nd mile, and from then on, every single step pushed sharp grit between the leather and her skin. But she just kept on walking. The road seemed to stretch on forever. The ruts from wagons were baked solid by the summer sun. Cottonwood trees cast long, lonely shadows over the dusty ground. Her traveling bag felt like it was getting heavier with every step she took. She would switch it from one hand to the other and then back again. Her simple cotton dress stuck to her, damp with a sweat that did nothing to cool her down anymore. Finally, a fence came into view. Then she saw a barn, its wood weathered to a soft gray with paint peeling off in long curls. Just past it was a solid-looking house with a porch that ran all the way across the front. A thin ribbon of smoke curled up from the chimney. Somebody was home. Someone who might just need a helping hand. She got to the gate and paused. A man was mending the fence at the far end of the property, his hammer rising and falling with a steady beat. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and his hat was pulled down low to block the setting sun. Abigail's throat was too parched to call out. She just lifted the latch on the gate, stepped inside, and began to walk toward him. He spotted her before she had even made it halfway. The hammering stopped. He stood up straight, and he watched her get closer with the tired look of a man who was not used to company. As she got nearer, she could see the dark patch of sweat on his shirt, the dust caked onto his boots, and the hard set of his jaw under a few days of stubble. "I am looking for some work," she said, her voice sounding raspy. "Anything at all. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend clothes. I can even handle your books if you need." He pulled his work gloves off slowly, taking his time with each finger. His gaze traveled from her worn-out shoes to her traveling bag and then up to her face. He did not say a word. "I am a hard worker," she insisted. "I do not need much. Just a place to sleep and my meals." "I cannot hire you," he said. His voice was flat, worn out like old boot leather. "I do not have any money to pay wages." The sun was sinking lower now. She could feel its warmth on her back through the thin material of her dress. She had nowhere else to go. There was no one else to ask. "Please," she said, "I will work just for my keep. I just need—" "I told you I cannot hire you." He looked away from her, out toward the horizon where the sun was a big orange ball sitting on top of the hills. His jaw was tight. Something in his eyes changed. "But I can marry you." The wooden wagon seat felt hard under her, and the wool blanket was worn through in spots. Abigail just sat there with her traveling bag resting between her feet, and her hands folded neatly in her lap. She watched the road appear before them as the wheels groaned and the horse's harness jingled with every step. Neither she nor the man sitting next to her said anything. Ethan Walker. That was the name he had given her, and that was all. He told her the bank demanded there be a wife living on the land by the next morning. He said his father had built that ranch up from scratch, and he was not about to be the one to lose it. She did not ask him any questions. He did not offer any more details than what was necessary. The sky turned from orange to a deep copper, then to the color of old rust. Abigail just watched it change, marking the sun's slow journey down behind the hills. Deep inside her chest, everything had gone quiet. The fear, the desperation, it all just settled into a low hum she could not put a name to. She was about to marry a complete stranger. The thought just sat there in her mind, like a rock at the bottom of a still pond. She thought it over and over, but there was nothing to be gained from it. Her hands stayed folded. Her breathing remained steady. The wagon just kept on moving. Dusty Creek finally showed up as a small collection of buildings against the darkening sky. There was a general store, all boarded up for the night. A saloon had light spilling out from its windows. And there was a church with white wood siding and a steeple that pointed up toward the first few stars. Ethan steered the wagon right past all of it, turning down a side street where the houses were smaller and built closer together. He stopped in front of a skinny two-story house that had a lamp glowing in the front window. "Justice Harmon," he said, and those were the first words he had spoken since they left the ranch. He hopped down, tied the horse to a nearby post, and then walked around to her side of the wagon. He held up a hand that looked rough, calloused but steady. She took it. Her feet touched the solid ground. The door opened up before they even got to the porch. A man was standing there in the lamplight. He had gray hair, glasses sitting on the end of his nose, and he was wearing a vest over his shirt sleeves. Behind him, a woman was peeking out. Her face was soft and full of curiosity. Ethan Walker. The justice's voice did not sound surprised at all. "I figured I would be seeing you. News gets around quick in a town this small." He looked over at Abigail for a moment, then back at Ethan. "The bank's deadline, I suppose?" "Yes, sir." Justice Harmon gave a slow nod. "Usually there is some paperwork, a bit of a waiting time, but I imagine the situation speaks for itself." He moved to the side. "Well, come on in. Let us not waste the little bit of daylight we have left." The front room was small and stuffy, but warm from a fire that was burning low in the fireplace. Old, yellowed lace doilies were draped over the arms of the chairs. An open Bible was sitting on a little table. "The justice's wife, Mrs. Harmon," she said, as she patted Abigail's hand with fingers that felt as soft as fresh dough, stood by the window to be their witness. "It will be all right, dear," she whispered. Her breath had a hint of peppermint to it. Justice Harmon opened up a drawer and took out a certificate that was printed on cream-colored paper. He smoothed it out on the table, took the cap off a pen, and then he looked up at Ethan. "Full names are Ethan James Walker." The pen made a scratching sound. "And the bride?" "Abigail Rose Turner," she said. More scratching sounds. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Outside, a dog barked a couple of times and then went quiet. "Do you have a ring?" Ethan reached deep into his pocket. When his hand came out, something small caught the lamplight. It was a simple gold band with a tiny chip of garnet stone set in the middle. The metal was worn down and smooth around the edges. "It belonged to my mother," he said, his voice dropping low and getting a little rough. "She is not here to give it to you herself." He held it out to her. Abigail held out her left hand. Her fingers were shaking, and she could not seem to make them stop. He gently took her hand with his other one to steady it. His palm felt warm against her skin. The ring slid right on. It was a perfect fit, and it was still warm from being in his pocket. Justice Harmon started to speak. The words just flowed over her: lawful matrimony, bound together, forsaking all others. They were familiar words, but they felt empty because of how strange this all was. She heard her own voice say, "I do," when it was her turn. She heard Ethan's voice, quiet but sure, say the same thing. "By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The very last bit of sun disappeared behind the hills. She watched it happen through the window. It was gone in the time it took to blink. Mrs. Harmon gently dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Justice Harmon turned the certificate around so they could see it, and he pointed to the lines at the bottom. "You will both sign here." Ethan signed his name first. His handwriting was sharp and confident. He handed the pen to her. The metal tip was still warm from his hand. She wrote her name, her new name, she suddenly realized, though nobody had actually said it out loud. Then she put the pen down. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Walker." Justice Harmon's voice was gentle. "May the Lord bless this union of yours." Ethan just gave a single nod. He did not smile, and neither did she. The ride back to the ranch was much darker and colder. A coal oil lantern hung from a hook on the wagon, and it threw shadows that danced and jumped with every bump in the road. The stars were out now, thick and bright, and a sliver of a moon was hanging low in the eastern sky. Abigail looked down at the ring on her finger. The little garnet stone caught the lantern light and glowed red for just a second, before going dark again. A ring that belonged to a dead woman, a stranger's mother. She was Mrs. Walker now. The ranch house slowly appeared out of the darkness, a solid shape against the night sky. Ethan drove the wagon into the barn, unhitched the horse with smooth, practiced movements, and then he led her across the yard to the back door of the house. The kitchen was dark and cold inside. He lit a lamp, and the room slowly came into view around them. There was a cast-iron stove, a pine table, and shelves filled with jars and tins. "This way," he said, and he led her down a short hallway to a door at the very end. Inside, there was a bed with a handmade quilt on it, a small pine washstand with a white pitcher and a basin, and a window that looked out into the black night. "This one is yours," he said. He placed her traveling bag just inside the doorway. "The latch works from the inside." She looked up at him. His face was hard to read in the flickering lamplight, all angles and deep shadows. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt small and foolish. He just gave a slight nod and stepped back into the hall. The door clicked shut between them. She heard his footsteps walking away, growing softer and softer, until there was only silence. Abigail was finally alone in the room that was now hers. The wedding ring felt heavy and strange on her finger. On the bed, a quilt was stitched with interlocking circles, a pattern made by hands she would never meet, for reasons she would never know. She walked over to the window and stared out into the pitch-black night. All she could see was the faint shape of the barn. Nothing more. Somewhere else in this big, quiet house, a total stranger, her new husband, was getting ready for bed. Tomorrow, men from the bank were coming. Tomorrow, her being here would mean something on a piece of paper. But tonight, in this little room that smelled like old dust and lavender, she was all by herself with a question she could not figure out how to answer. What in the world had she just become? She was awake long before the sun. The room had a chill to it, and the quilt felt like a weight on her chest. For just a second, she had no idea where she was. The ceiling was wrong, the shadows fell in unfamiliar ways, and the air smelled of dust and lavender. Not the damp, sour smell of her old boarding house in Ohio. And then it all came rushing back. The long stagecoach ride, the man who had died on the journey, and the stranger who was now her husband. Abigail swung her legs out of bed, pushing the heavy quilt away. Her bare feet touched the floorboards, and the cold shot right through her. She quickly got dressed in the dim gray light that was just starting to peek through the window. She put on the same wrinkled calico dress from yesterday. It was the only one she owned, besides the Sunday dress she kept folded neatly in her travel bag. The hallway was completely still. She tiptoed down the hall, listening for any noise from behind the other closed door. There was nothing. When she found the kitchen, she stopped in the doorway to take it all in. A cast-iron stove, cold and black. A pine table covered in the scars of 100 knife cuts. Shelves were lined with jars of what looked like preserves. Tins of coffee and flour sat next to a crock of bacon grease. The sink was dry, with no dirty dishes in sight. Not a single crumb was on the counter. It was a bachelor's kitchen, all right, kept tidy out of habit, not because anyone really cared. She opened the stove door, found a box with kindling and matches right beside it, and started building a fire. The small bits of wood caught, and flames began to lick up through the metal grate. She added bigger pieces until a steady crackle filled the room. Then she took the speckled coffee pot, filled it with water from the pump at the sink, and set it on the stovetop. By the time the coffee was boiling, sunlight was starting to stretch across the wooden floor. She found 2 tin cups, poured one full for herself, and stood right there by the stove to drink it. She stood, not wanting to sit at the table like she actually belonged there. Then she heard heavy, deliberate footsteps coming down the hall. Ethan appeared in the doorway. He already had his suspenders on and his boots laced up. He stopped short when he saw her. "Coffee's hot," she said. He walked over to the stove, poured a cup for himself, and drank nearly half of it in one long gulp. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes and the dark stubble on his jaw. She noticed his shoulders seemed tense, even standing here in his own kitchen. "I'll be out in the south pasture till about noon," he said. He finished his coffee and placed the empty cup in the sink. "There's bread in the box and bacon in that crock." And just like that, he was gone. The back door slammed shut behind him, leaving her alone once more. She ate her breakfast standing up. It was just bread dipped in bacon grease, washed down with another cup of coffee. After that, she decided to look around. The house was a lot bigger than it seemed from the outside. There was a parlor she hadn't noticed last night. It was furnished with a prickly horsehair sofa and 2 chairs, all arranged around a fireplace that was cold as stone. An old Bible with a cracked spine sat on the mantel. Its pages were soft from being turned so many times. On the wall hung a stitched sampler with faded flowers around some words she didn't bother to read. A woman had lived in this house at one time. It must have been Ethan's mother, the one who used to wear the ring that was now on Abigail's finger. But the sampler was old and faded. The chair cushions were flat from years of use, and thick dust had settled in the corners the broom had not reached. Whoever that woman was, she had been gone for a very long time. Abigail found a small room right off the parlor that held an oak desk. Its top was a mess of papers, envelopes, and an inkwell that had long since dried up. She knew she ought not to look. It was not her business. But she looked anyway. In the bottom drawer, she found a ledger. Its leather cover was cracked along the spine. She pulled it out, laid it open on the desk, and felt her breath catch in her throat. It was a complete mess. There were 3 years of entries written in 2 different hands. One was neat and orderly, but the other was cramped and shaky. Columns of numbers did not add up right. Figures were crossed out and written over. Interest charges were calculated in a way that made no sense at all. Her father had been the one to teach her about numbers. This was before the big scandal, before the bankruptcy, and before he took his own life rather than face the men he had wronged. He had sat with her at their kitchen table back in Ohio, showing her how to make sense of a ledger. He taught her about assets and liabilities, credits and debits, the kind of math that always tells the truth, especially when people are telling lies. She took the ledger into the kitchen, set it on the table, and got to work. The morning slipped away. The fire in the stove burned down to embers, and she added more wood without ever looking up from the pages. Her coffee grew cold, but she did not even notice. The numbers had completely pulled her in. Every entry was like a piece of a puzzle, Each calculation was a thread she had to follow. Around noon, she found the first mistake. It was a payment that had been recorded twice, once in the neat handwriting, and again in the cramped scrawl. She drew a circle around it and kept on going. Ethan came back inside for his midday meal. She had been so focused that she had completely forgotten to cook anything. He looked at her, sitting there with his papers spread all over the kitchen table. He glanced at the cold stove but did not say a word. He just cut himself a slice of bread and a piece of cheese, ate it while standing by the window, and then went right back outside. She hardly even realized he had left. The afternoon uncovered even more mistakes. There was interest charged on loans that had already been paid off. Fees seemed to appear out of thin air. They were small amounts, the kind you would easily miss if you were not looking closely. And they were always in the bank's favor. Just a few dollars here and a few dollars there, adding up over time. By evening, her eyes were burning, and her back ached from being hunched over the book for so long. She had filled 3 whole sheets of paper with her notes, corrections, and questions. The pattern was undeniable now. Someone at the bank had been slowly stealing money, probably for years. They were likely doing it to anyone who did not understand their numbers well enough to notice. She heard the sound of Ethan's boots on the porch. The back door creaked open. He stopped right in the doorway, looking at her with that same surprised expression from the morning, as if she were some strange creature that had suddenly appeared in his kitchen. "They have been charging you wrong," she said. She turned the ledger so he could see it and pointed to a column she had marked up. "They charged interest on a loan your father paid off back in 1881. By my count, they have taken $47 that they had no right to." He stood perfectly still, not saying a word. His eyes moved to the page, followed the column of figures down, and stopped on the entry she had circled. "You sure about that?" he asked. "I am sure. My father." She paused and swallowed hard. "I learned numbers when I was young. I know what I'm looking at." He pulled out the chair across the table from her and sat down. The old chair groaned under his weight. He spent a long time studying the pages, his finger tracing the lines she had drawn, connecting all the wrong entries. His lips moved just a little as he double-checked her math. $47, he said at last. "Yes." He looked up at her then, and it felt like he was truly seeing her for the first time. Not since she had walked through his gate had he looked at her like this. His eyes were gray, she realized. They were the color of old weathered wood, like a winter sky, the kind of gray that has seen too much but decides to keep on going anyway. "My father, he was the one who kept these books," he said. "After he passed, I tried to keep up, but I just ain't got the head for numbers." "I do," she said simply. He gave a slow nod. He closed the ledger and stood up. "I will go speak to the bank." He tucked the book under his arm but paused at the door. "Thank you." Just 2 words, but his voice was rough with an emotion she could not quite name. Then he was gone again, heading out to the barn with the ledger in his hand. Later that evening, she found him sitting on the porch. There were 2 rocking chairs with rope seats facing the yard. He was in one of them, his boots propped up on the railing, just watching the last bits of daylight fade from the sky. She stood in the doorway, unsure if she should join him. "There's coffee in the pot," he said without even turning his head. "If you want some." She poured 2 cups and brought them outside. She handed one to him and sat down in the other chair. They did not say anything for a while. The rocking chairs creaked, their rhythms clashing at first, but then slowly falling into a shared, steady pace. The sky turned into colors she did not have names for, like rust and amber, with a deeper color darkening the edges. In the distance, the cattle made low sounds. A bird sang its last song for the evening and then went quiet. Her cup was empty, but she did not get up to get more. "Ethan," she said, just to try out the name. He turned his head just a little bit toward her. "Thank you. For the room, for—" She made a small gesture with her hand that was meant to include the land, the house, all of it. This. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You earned it." It was only 3 words, but they felt like so much more. The stars began to appear one by one, but neither of them made a move to go inside. The silence between them felt different now. It was not empty anymore. It felt shared. 2 quiet people just sitting with all the things they did not need to say. When she finally stood up to go in, her hand accidentally brushed against the arm of his chair. He did not move away. She walked to the door and paused, her fingers resting on the wooden frame. "Good night, Mr. Walker." "Ethan," he said. "You can just call me Ethan." She took his name with her back into the house, down the dark hallway, and into the small room. It smelled less like dust now. It smelled more like something else, something she could not quite identify. But as she lay there in the dark, waiting to fall asleep, a thought she had pushed away all day finally came to the surface. She had been too busy with all those numbers to face it until now. $47 was a whole lot of money for a ranch that was struggling. When Ethan showed the bank the proof, they were going to have questions. They would want to know who found all those mistakes, who went through the book so carefully. And when they found out it was his new wife, the complete stranger he had married just the day before, they would start asking questions about her too. 2 questions she was not at all ready to answer. The weeks that followed soon fell into their own rhythm. Abigail started to learn the shape of the days up. She was up before the sunrise. Coffee was already brewing on the stove by the time she heard the solid thud of Ethan's boots in the hall. They took their breakfast together at the old pine table, its surface a map of nicks and scars from a lifetime of use. When he left for the open pastures, she would turn her attention to the house, to the quiet, steady rhythm of tasks that marked the time until he returned. She darned the faded calico curtains in the front room, the material so worn by the sun it would split if she wasn't careful with her needle. On her hands and knees, she scrubbed the floors until the pale grain of the pine wood shone through. She put the pantry in order, wiping away layers of dust from canning jars his mother must have put up long ago. She had to throw out the ones where the seal had failed, and dark blossoms of mold grew under the lids. After a while, the wedding ring on her finger no longer felt strange every time she flexed her hand. It was just there now, a part of her, like the tough new skin forming on her palms. On the 4th day, Ethan led her out to the stable. "If you are going to make a life on a ranch," he told her, "you have got to understand horses." A bay mare stood waiting patiently in her stall, her dark, gentle eyes watching as Abigail came closer. The smell was the first thing that hit her, a mix of hay and manure, and that warm, living scent of the animal that filled the entire space. Up close, it was a powerful thing, rich and very real. "This here is Belle." Ethan smoothed his hand down the mare's powerful neck. "She is a gentle soul. She will not spook on you." He showed her the right way to brush the coat. Long, even strokes that followed the lie of the hair. He taught her how to check the hooves for rocks, lifting each heavy leg with a calm certainty that made the horse stand easy. He showed her how to measure the feed, how to top off the water trough from the big rain barrel just outside. He taught her to see the little signs that tell you something is wrong long before it gets serious. Abigail listened hard, watching his hands, and tried to copy his every move. "Not so rough," he said when she started brushing. "Be firm but easy," he explained, "like you are scratching an itch she cannot get to herself." She eased up on the pressure. Belle's ears twitched forward, and she leaned right into the brush, making a low, contented rumble deep in her chest. That is it. They worked there side by side. Ethan tended to his ranch work, and Abigail cared for the mare. The stable felt warm against the morning chill, full of the soft sounds of hooves rustling in the straw, the steady breathing of the horses, and the whisk of the brush moving through a thick coat. Neither of them said more than what was needed. It felt like enough. By the 3rd week, she could get Belle saddled all on her own, even though the heavy buckle still fought her when her fingers were numb with cold. By the 4th week, she was riding out with Ethan. 4th week, she was riding out with Ethan to check the fence lines. Her legs ached by noon, and her hands felt raw from holding the reins too tight. He never said a word about how clumsy she looked. He just pointed out the landmarks as they rode, the creek that served as the northern boundary, the grove of cottonwood trees where his daddy had asked his mama to marry him 40 years back. He showed her the stony hill folks called Devil's Thumb, though no one could recall why anymore. She got to know the cattle, too. There was the black heifer with the stripe of white running down her face, and the old bull with a torn ear, a survivor of some long-ago fight, who always walked with a little hitch in his gait. She learned about the spring calves that would scatter if she rode up too fast, then creep back, full of curiosity, once she had passed by. The land just opened up all around her, immense and brown and a world away from Ohio. There were no trees crowding in on you. No neighbors close enough to wave to, just miles of grass and sky, and a wind that never seemed to stop blowing across the rolling hills. On Sundays, she took over the cooking. Her first try was a disaster. The biscuits came out like heavy rocks, and the gravy was full of lumps of flour she had not mixed in right. Ethan ate every bite without a single word of complaint, using store-bought bread to soak up the gravy because those biscuits were a lost cause. She felt the need to apologize. He just asked if there was any more coffee. The second Sunday went a whole lot better. She made a roast beef from the smokehouse. The potatoes came from the root cellar and were perfectly soft. The carrots nearly melted on the fork. And the biscuits actually rose this time, all golden on top and fluffy inside. Ethan cleaned his plate, glanced at the pot still sitting on the stove, and got up to help himself to a second serving without even asking. He never said it was good. He did not have to. They ate their meals together now, all of them, sitting at that same pine table. They would pass the bread and the butter and the salt back and forth without a word. His silence did not feel like a wall between them anymore. It was just his way, the way of a man who had spent too many years by himself to waste time on words that did not need saying. But he was starting to talk more. It was small things at first, like the price for cattle down in San Antonio. He talked about the signs of weather he could read in the clouds. He explained how the creek would rise 3 days before a storm hit the ranch, because the water flowed down from the hills. Then, he started sharing bigger things. He told her his father had died during the drought of '79. It was not from thirst. There was enough water for a man to drink. He died from watching his herd waste away to nothing over 6 weeks of brown grass and a hard, empty sky. 50 head of cattle lost before the rains finally came. His father went out to the barn one evening and did not come back until the next morning. And when Ethan found him, he was just sitting on an old bucket, his hands shaking too, badly to even hold a coffee cup. He lived for another year after that, Ethan told her, but he was never the same man. Something inside of him had just given up. Abigail just listened. She did not offer him empty words of comfort. What comfort could she give for a hurt that was 7 years old? Instead, she just poured him another cup of coffee, and he wrapped his big hands around the mug like he was holding on to the last solid thing in the world. She never said a word about Ohio. He never asked. The 5th week brought the rain. It began in the middle of the night, a soft tapping on the roof that turned into a steady downpour by sunrise. Abigail woke up to a gray morning and the smell of wet earth drifting in through the window she had left cracked open. The air itself had changed. It was cooler, heavier, and carried a scent of green and growing things that made her chest feel lighter in a way she could not quite explain. Ethan had already left when she got to the kitchen. His empty coffee cup was sitting in the sink. She poured a cup for herself and stood by the window, just watching the rain come down in sheets across the yard, filling up the rain barrel by the stable until water was spilling over the top and making puddles in the mud below. She found him in the stable about an hour later. He was mending a piece of harness that had broken the day before. The leather was old and cracked in places. He sat on an overturned crate with all the pieces laid out across his lap. She had brought him some coffee. Steam was rising from the cup, even with the damp chill from the rain. "I thought you might be needing this." He took it from her without even looking up. His fingers were busy with the leather, threading a new strap through the old brass buckles that had turned green around the edges. She stood and watched him work. The rain beat a steady rhythm on the roof above them, and the horses shifted quietly in their stalls. "Can I help with that?" He looked up at her, then over at the mess of straps and buckles on the bench next to him. "Do you know anything about fixing a harness?" "No." "Then I suppose you can learn." He handed her a broken buckle, a fresh strip of leather, and a small tool she had never seen before. He showed her how to punch the holes through the leather, how to hammer in the rivets, and how to test the strength of the repair by pulling on it until the leather groaned, but did not break. Her fingers felt cold and clumsy. The rain had brought a damp chill that worked its way through the stable walls, even with the warmth of the animals. She fumbled with the buckle twice before she finally got the leather threaded through it correctly. "Pull it through first," Ethan said. He reached out to help. His hand covered hers, and it felt warm, calloused, and so steady. "Then you loop it." His palm was pressed right against her knuckles. She could feel the roughness of his skin, a careful strength in his grip, and a warmth that chased away the cold in her fingers. The leather strap slid perfectly into place under their joined hands. "Just like that," he said. His hand lingered there. For one breath, then two, and then it was gone. He was back to his own work, and the rain kept on falling. Neither of them said a word about what had just happened between them. But she would remember the weight of his hand, the way his voice had softened, and that tiny moment of stillness before he pulled away. That night, lying in her room with the rain still tapping against the window pane, she found herself doing something for the first time since leaving Ohio, she was actually looking forward to the next day. That thought should have felt like a warm blanket. Instead, it landed heavy as a river rock in her gut because she knew this story by heart. She saw it play out with her own father, how he'd build something good one slow day at a time just to watch it all get wiped out in a single gust of wind. She had let herself start to hope. And hoping was a dangerous game because her father had been a hopeful man, too, building a life on bad numbers and empty promises. When the truth finally came calling, he found his courage at the end of a barrel. Ethan had no idea. He had married a complete stranger just to keep his own land. And he was a good man. And lately he had started looking at her in a way that stole her breath and made her forget what her hands were doing. But in a town this small, where gossip spreads quicker than a prairie fire, what would happen when the truth found him? It was never a matter of if, just a matter of when. The rider showed up on the road just after 10 in the morning. Abigail spotted him from the kitchen window while she was drying the last of the breakfast plates. He was a dark shape on a dark horse, moving slow and easy. A small cloud of dust trailed behind him. Even from far off, she could tell he was wearing city clothes by the way he sat in the saddle, all stiff and out of place. He was a man who spent his days at a desk, not on the back of a horse. Ethan came inside from the barn, his muddy boots leaving tracks all over the floor she had just scrubbed. He glanced out the window and his jaw set hard. "The bank," he said, his voice low and tight. "Get out the good cups." She found them tucked away in the hutch. They were white china with a delicate blue design around the edges. Not a single chip on them, the kind you only use for important company. The silver coffee pot sat on the shelf right above, with tarnish in all the little cracks the polish never reached. She brought it all into the kitchen, filled the pot with fresh coffee, and set the cups on a tray over a lace cloth that had yellowed with time. By the time she was done, Ethan had washed up at the pump and put on a clean shirt. He stood by the front door, his shoulders back, just waiting. The knock was sharp and quick. 3 fast taps. Ethan pulled the door open. The man who came inside was tall and skinny, with a gold chain stretched across his vest and a smile that had too many teeth in it. He had on a dark gray city suit pressed so sharp you could get cut, and he didn't even bother to take off his hat when he stepped over the threshold. "Mr. Walker," the man's voice was like smooth oil, something he had practiced 1,000 times. "Mighty good of you to see me with so little warning. Mr. Cartwright." Ethan's voice was steady as a rock, cautious. Come on in. We can have our talk in the parlor." Abigail stayed put in the kitchen, listening to their boots on the wood floors and the sound of the parlor door groaning shut. She could hear the low drone of their voices, but could not make out the words. She let them talk for 5 minutes, making sure the coffee was still piping hot and placing a few biscuits on a plate. Then she picked up the tray and started for the parlor. The door was cracked open just enough. Now she could hear them perfectly. Cartwright's smooth, higher voice, Ethan's deep rumble, something about $47, something about figuring the interest all over again. She stopped right outside the door, holding the heavy tray with one hand while reaching for the doorknob with the other. "Well, now, that was quite a surprise, I have to admit." Cartwright's voice slipped right through the open space. "When I heard you had gone and gotten yourself married overnight, I figured it was some local girl, but that name, Turner, well, that got some folks talking back at the bank." Abigail's hand froze on the door frame. "The Turner girl from Ohio," Cartwright went on. You could hear the smirk in his words. "I seem to recall reading about that whole affair in the newspapers, about her father, Richard Turner. Did he not take money that belonged to his own partners? Thousands of dollars over a number of years. It was a terrible scandal when it all blew up." The whole tray started to shake in her hands. Coffee splashed over the side of the pot. A dark stain spread across the silver. And then, when they showed him the proof, he took the easy way out. Mr. Cartwright stopped, letting his ugly words hang in the air. Put a pistol in his mouth instead of facing up to what he did. Left his wife and daughter to clean up his mess. She could not get a breath. It felt like all the air had been sucked right out of the hallway. "The board has its concerns, Mr. Walker." Cartwright's voice changed then. The silk in it turned to sandpaper. "You have married the daughter of a thief and a man who took his own life. A woman who spent her whole childhood watching her father lie and steal from his closest friends. And now here she is, looking over your account books, finding mistakes no one else ever saw." He paused. "A man could get to thinking that is mighty convenient." The tray shook so hard that hot coffee spilled over the edge, scalding her fingers, but she barely felt the burn. "What are you trying to say?" Ethan's voice was quiet, but it had the rumble of thunder in it. "I am not suggesting a thing. Just making an observation. The board has to consider the risk, Mr. Walker. A man's character, his judgment. You have shown us yours by marrying this woman without knowing a thing about her, and she has shown us hers by running from a scandal that chased her halfway across the country." There was another pause, this one longer. "That $47 is small potatoes. We can talk about that. But the bigger question we have is, can the bank put its trust in a man who makes choices like this one?" Abigail carefully set the tray down on the floor in the hallway. She could not get her hands to be still. The cups chattered against the saucers, so she pressed her palms hard against her legs to stop them. She did not even hear what Ethan said back. The blood was pounding too hard in her ears, blocking out everything but the sound of Cartwright's words. Thief, coward, running from scandal. She turned around and walked back to the kitchen. She went out the back door, walked across the yard, and went into the stable. Belle lifted her head the moment Abigail walked in, her ears swiveling forward. The horse knew her by now, her scent, her walk, the quiet way she moved. Abigail reached for the brush without a thought, walked over to the mare's side and started to stroke her coat. Slow, steady strokes, firm but gentle. It was the same way Ethan had shown her how to do it weeks before, back when she still thought she could build a real life for herself here. Thief. Coward. She started brushing harder. Belle shifted her weight and made a soft noise of complaint, so Abigail lightened her touch. She just kept brushing. The steady rhythm was a comfort, something to keep her hands busy while her mind was drowning in dark thoughts. She had straightened out the ledger. She had found the $47. She had helped save this ranch from the bank's quiet thievery, and after all that, she was still the problem. Her father's face appeared in her mind, not the awful pale face she had found on the parlor floor, but the one from before. The father who laughed at her jokes, who taught her how to read columns of numbers at the kitchen table, who promised her mother that everything was going to be fine, that his business deals were solid, that they would be set for life by Christmas. And the whole time, he was lying. Every smile, every promise, every kind word was built on what he had stolen. And she had believed him because he was her father, and fathers were not supposed to lie. But hers did. And when the lie finally fell apart, he took the coward's way out and left her with his name hanging around her neck like a millstone. She brushed Belle until her arm was sore, and the mare's coat was shining in the dim light of the stable. The horse just stood there patiently, sometimes turning her head to look at Abigail with her big, dark, simple eyes. The stable door creaked open. She did not bother to turn around. "He's gone." Ethan's voice was quiet right behind her. She kept on brushing. "I heard." A moment passed. She could feel him standing there just a few feet away, watching her. The air between them grew thick with a new kind of quiet. Nothing like the easy silence they had shared over suppers and on the porch in the evenings. "It is true, what he said about my father." The words came out of her with no feeling at all. Every word. He stole from his partners. And when they found out, he ended his own life. I was the one who found him on the parlor floor when I got home from the market. More silence. The brush moved through Belle's mane, finding a small knot and working it loose with gentle fingers. "I was planning to tell you," she said. The words felt like ash in her mouth, but she said them anyway. I just could not seem to find the right moment. She heard him move, heard the sound of his boots in the straw. Abigail. She stopped brushing, her hand dropped to her side. She still could not make herself turn and look at him. Look at me. She could not do it. If she looked at him, she would see it in his eyes. The disappointment, the anger, the look of a man who knows he has made a bad deal. She had seen that look before. She saw it on the faces of neighbors in Ohio who suddenly could not see her on the street, on her mother's friends who stopped visiting, on every person who knew her father and decided she had to wear his sins too. "I can leave." Her voice was surprisingly steady. "I can be packed and gone before the sun comes up. You can tell the bank that things did not work out. Find yourself somebody else." "Buddy, is that what you want?" The question just hung there in the air, strange and completely unexpected. She finally turned then and looked at him. He was standing in the doorway. The afternoon sun at his back threw his face into shadow. You could not tell a thing from his expression, just hard lines and angles. His hands were just hanging by his sides. He did not move closer, but he did not move away either. "What I want has got nothing to do with it." She looked him right in the eye. "You married me to save this land. If my being here is going to make that harder, I asked you what you want." She just stared at him. Not a single person had asked her that question since her father died. Nobody had even cared. "I want," she started, and then stopped to try again. "I want to be something other than his daughter. I want to stop having to carry what he did with me everywhere I turn. I want—" The words got all choked up in her throat. They were too big and too painful to get out. Ethan just watched her for a long time. She saw something shift in his eyes, but she could not figure out what it was. Then he gave a short nod and turned to leave. "Supper is at 6, he said over his shoulder. "Same as always." He walked out of the stable and into the light. The door swung closed behind him. Abigail stood there in the quiet with the horse and the brush, and a question she had no answer for. But there was no denying something had shifted. She had seen it in the stiff way he held his shoulders as he left, and she had heard it in the cold, flat tone of his voice. The comfortable silence that had grown between them was now broken, and she had no idea if it could ever be fixed. Mr. Cartwright's words came back to her in the quiet barn. Can the bank really trust a man who makes a decision like this one? But the question was not just about the bank any longer. It was about Ethan. It was about whether he could ever trust her, now that he knew the truth she had been hiding. And seeing the way he had walked away from her, his back rigid, his presence suddenly distant, Like a man putting up walls around himself, she truly was not sure of the answer. Sleep would not come. The ceiling was just a canvas of shadows, shapes that moved when the clouds drifted across the moon, and then fell still again when they passed. Abigail lay flat on her back, her hands crossed over her chest, and just watched the darkness seem to breathe in the space above her. Bad judgment just runs in some families. Cartwright's voice circled in her mind, smooth and smug. It was the voice of a man who knew the perfect place to twist a knife. She had heard that tone. She remembered it from neighbors back in Ohio, folks who would cross the whole street just to avoid her. She remembered it in the silence from her mother's friends who suddenly stopped calling. It was there in the eyes of the creditors who showed up at the house demanding money for debts her father had sworn up and down he did not have. She rolled onto her side and the quilt made a soft rustling sound. Out in the dark, an owl hooted a low, lonely call across the pasture. Thief and coward. That is what they had called her father. And because of him, that is what they called her too. The daughter of a thief and a coward. She carried his blood, his failings, his stain. It did not matter one bit that she had never taken a thing that was not hers. It did not matter that she had sold every last possession to her name to pay back what she could. The name was all that counted, and now Ethan knew. She pushed herself up. A chill was in the room, and she could see her own breath in the pale moonlight. Her bare feet touched the cold floorboards, and she walked to the window. The whole ranch was peaceful under a blanket of stars. She saw the barn, the very fence line she had helped him fix, the porch where they had sat together evening after evening. They did not talk much, they just were. And every bit of it belonged to him. Every single bit of it was in danger now because of her. The ring on her finger caught a glimmer of moonlight. She stared at it, the simple gold band with its little piece of garnet. The metal was worn smooth from the years his own mother had worn it. He had given it to a stranger because there was nobody else left to give it to. She twisted it around her finger. It slid off easier than she thought it would. The decision settled in her heart like frost on a window pane, starting slow with one little crystal, then spreading fast until it covered everything. She could not stay here. She could not bear to watch him lose everything his father had worked for, all because he got desperate enough to marry a woman with a ruined name. She could not sit across the breakfast table from him and see the kindness in his eyes slowly sour into regret. It was better to leave now. It was better to go before he even had to ask her. She got dressed in the dark. It was the calico dress, the same one she had on when she first arrived, the one she had shoved to the back of the wardrobe to make room for a Sunday dress with pretty pearl buttons. Her travel bag had never even been fully unpacked. She left the good dress hanging right where it was. She felt she had not earned the right to wear it. The hallway was completely silent. She moved like a ghost down the hall, past his closed door, and past the parlor where that man Cartwright had announced her shame to the world. She went to the kitchen where she had found his stolen money, and let herself dream that she might finally belong somewhere. The little candlestick was right where she left it, sitting in a tin holder by the stove. She struck a match. She found some paper in the desk drawer. It was the same creamy paper that the justice of the peace had used for their marriage certificate. She found the pen with the steel tip. Dried ink was caked on the end. She sat down at the table and started to write. Her first try was much too long. She tried to explain about her father's crimes and her mother's shame. She wrote about how the whole town of Ohio had closed in on her like a tight fist until she could hardly breathe. She read it over, then crumpled the paper, feeding it to the candle flame, watching it curl up and turn to black ash. The second letter she wrote came out angry. In it, she blamed Cartwright. She blamed the bank. She blamed every last person who had ever looked at her and saw nothing but her father's mistakes. That one went into the fire, too. The third letter was just the simple truth. It said, "The bank will treat you fair once I am gone. A man should not lose his land because of the woman he married. I am grateful for the weeks we had. Do not come looking for me. There is nothing left for me in Ohio either. but at least there I will not cost you anything." She did not sign her name. He would know her handwriting. The ring was sitting on the table right beside the letter. She looked at it for a long while, the garnet stone looking dark in the candlelight, the gold band catching little flickers from the flame. Then she set it right on top of the folded paper, placing it carefully in the center, and she stood up. Her finger felt bare without it, a pale mark where the ring used to be. A thin strip of lighter skin showed where she had let herself play pretend. She blew out the candle. The back door opened to pure darkness. The cold, damp air hit her face, and she realized a fog had rolled in, so thick it had swallowed the barn whole, so thick she could almost taste it on her tongue. She could not see more than 10 feet in front of her. She stepped down from the porch, and her foot landed in mud. The rain from last week had left the yard all soft, and her boots sank right down to her ankle. She pulled it free with a wet, sucking noise and stumbled forward, and her other foot sank even deeper. The travel bag swung at her side, throwing her off balance. She staggered and tried to steady herself, then took another step. The ground just gave way. She went down hard, first on her knees, then her hands, then her face. The mud was cold and thick. It was black as night, and it got in her mouth, her nose, and her eyes. She coughed and spit, trying to push herself up, but her hands just sank deeper. Her travel bag had fallen somewhere nearby. She could not see it. She could not see a single thing. For a second, she just lay there, face down in the muck, in the dark, in a fog that had erased the whole world. Her dress was soaked clear through, heavy with filth. Her hair was hanging in wet clumps around her face. The mud had the foul smell of manure and old rotting grass, and it was caked on her skin, her clothes, everything about her. "This is what you are." The thought came out of nowhere, sharp and cruel as a knife. "This is what you have always been. Just crawling in the dirt, like your father's shame had come to life." She managed to push herself up to her knees. Her hands were black with mud. She could not even recognize them in the dark. She tried to wipe her face, but her sleeve was just as filthy, and all she did was smear more muck across her cheeks, her forehead, and her lips. The taste of it, like iron and rot and something sour, filled her mouth. The stable. She had to get to the stable, get a horse, and ride to town to catch the morning stagecoach. That was the plan. But her hands would not close around Belle's bridle. She stood there in the stable doorway, dripping filth onto the clean straw, and the mare just looked at her with those big, dark, patient eyes. Belle knew her. She had learned her smell, the sound of her voice, the steady rhythm of her hands with the brush. Belle was not her horse. Belle belonged to Ethan, to the Broken Creek Ranch, to the life she was trying so hard to leave behind. If she took the mare, she would be a thief. She would be exactly what Cartwright had called her. Her hand dropped from the leather. She had spent 5 long years trying to prove she was not her father. 5 years paying off debts that were not hers, saying sorry for crimes she did not commit, and carrying a shame she did not earn. And now, standing in a stable that smelled of hay and horses, and a life she had almost let herself want, she had been about to prove them all right. No. The word came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place she thought had died on that parlor floor with her father. No, she would not take what was not hers. She would walk all the way to town if she had to. She would walk all the way back to Ohio, but she would not become the person they all believed she was. She picked up her travel bag, slick with mud and heavy with grime, and she turned toward the stable door. The fog was starting to lift now. A gray light was creeping up along the edge of the sky. It was the first pale sign of dawn. It was 4 miles to town. She had walked it before on blistered feet with nothing but a dead man's promise and 14 cents in her pocket. She could walk it again. She stepped out of the stable and started down the road. Behind her, somewhere back in the house, a floorboard creaked. Ethan was waking up. The road stretched out ahead of her, gray and empty. Abigail walked with her head held low, watching her ruined boots make prints in the mud. The fog had thinned out enough for her to see the shape of the land, the fence lines, the cottonwood trees, and the faraway scattering of buildings that was Dusty Creek. It was less than 4 miles now. She figured she had been walking for an hour, maybe longer. Her legs had found a steady rhythm that did not ask a thing of her mind. One foot, then the other, then the first one again. The mud on her dress was starting to dry, making the fabric stiff so that it crackled with every step she took. Her hair was hanging in matted clumps around her face, and she could feel the grit of the dirt between her teeth. She could taste the iron and rot from the barnyard where she had fallen. She must have looked like something dragged up from a swamp, like some mad woman running away in the dark. And maybe that is exactly what she was. The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the last little bits of fog. The day was going to get warm soon. She could feel the promise of heat in the air. She knew how Texas mornings could turn from cool to scorching hot in less than an hour. By the time the stagecoach arrived, she would be dry. She would still be filthy, but at least she would be dry. She did not let herself think about what would happen after that. One foot, then the other. That was all that mattered. The depot finally came into view in the distance. It was the same weathered bench where she had stood just 6 weeks ago with a letter from a dead man crumpled in her hand. The same hitching post was there. The telegraph office with its dusty windows was the same too. The same feeling of emptiness that had met her then was there to meet her now. The stage was not there yet. The morning run would not get in for a few hours. She walked over to the bench and sat down. She put her travel bag at her feet, still slick and heavy with mud. She folded her hands in her lap and just waited. The town was starting to wake up around her. A shopkeeper was unlocking his front door. A woman was hanging laundry on a line behind one of the houses. A dog trotted down the middle of the main street with its nose to the ground, searching for something only it could smell. Nobody looked at her. Nobody paid any mind to the mud-caked woman sitting all by herself on the depot bench at dawn. That was just fine with her. She did not want anyone to notice her. She heard the sound of hoofbeats long before she saw the rider. They were coming fast, with a sense of urgency, from the direction of the ranch. Her hands clenched together in her lap. She did not turn her head to look. The horse slowed down as it got to the edge of town, its hooves making a clattering sound on the packed dirt instead of the muddy road. She heard the creak of saddle leather. She heard the heavy breathing of an animal that had been pushed hard. Then the hoofbeats stopped. A pair of boots hit the ground. 1 step, 2 steps, 3? Someone was walking toward her. Abigail. It was Ethan's voice. It sounded rough, like he was out of breath, with nothing left in it but her name. She finally looked up. He was standing about 10 feet away. His horse stood behind him, all lathered up and breathing hard. He wasn't wearing a hat. Looked like he left in a big hurry. And that shirt was the same one he had on yesterday, all wrinkled and buttoned up wrong. He held a folded piece of paper in one hand. In the other he had something tiny that glinted in the morning sun. The ring and the letter. Don't. Her voice was raspy and cracked, rough from the mud she must have swallowed. Just don't. He took one more step in her direction, then stopped cold. His eyes scanned over her, taking in the filth that covered her dress and the mud that was caked solid in her hair. She was hunched over on the bench like a creature that had lost all hope. You fell, he said. Does it make a difference? You were set to take Belle. It was not a question. But you did not. She looked down at the ground, at her ruined boots, at her hands still stained black with dried mud, even after she had tried to clean them. I am not a thief, she said. Whatever else you think I am not that. He stood there quiet for a second. Then he walked the last few feet and sat down on the bench beside her. Not so close they were touching, but close enough to talk. I knew, he said. She turned her head to look at him. Knew what? About your father? About Ohio? About everything? All of it. He held up the letter, still folded, so she could see her own handwriting on the outside. Before I ever read this, before Cartwright even opened his big mouth, I knew something about those words did not add up. She stared right at him, searching his face for any sign of a lie, any trick hiding behind his gaze. All she saw was a calm, gray stillness looking back at her. "I do not understand." "The day your stagecoach pulled in," he said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees, staring out at the empty street. "I was over at the feed store getting some wire for the north fence. People were talking about the mail-order bride on her way for Harold Meeks, saying how she was the daughter of some swindler back east who shot himself instead of standing trial." He took a breath. "They were saying awful things about you, about your name, about your daddy's debts. Talking about how any man who would marry a girl like that had to be either desperate or a fool or maybe both." Abigail felt her throat tighten up. She could not find her voice. "I heard every last word." Ethan turned his head and looked straight at her. "Then I rode out to that fence line, the one that runs alongside the road. And I just waited." "You waited?" "I figured if you were coming all this way to marry Harold, you would have to come down that road. And I wanted to see for myself what kind of woman would travel halfway across the country to marry a fella she'd never even laid eyes on." She remembered that day clear as anything. The long, dusty road, the blisters starting on her feet, the gate, and the man fixing the fence who watched her get closer with a tired look in his eyes. "You knew," she said, the words coming out slow. "The entire time you knew exactly who I was. I knew who your father was. I knew the things people were saying about you." He held up the ring and the little garnet stone caught the light. "I did not know you. That came later. Then why?" Her voice hitched in her throat. She pressed her hands flat against her legs, trying to keep herself together. "Why did you marry me?" He was quiet for a good long while. A wagon rumbled down the street behind them, its wheels groaning, the driver shouting at his horses. The sound faded away before Ethan spoke again. "You walked 4 whole miles in shoes that were falling apart." His voice was low and a little rough around the edges. "When you got to my gate, all you had was a carpet bag, and you asked me for honest work, not a handout." He shook his head. "A woman that'll do that after all she has been through, she ain't anything like her daddy. That is something different altogether." Abigail felt a crack run through something deep inside her chest. Something she had been holding together for 5 years, stitched up with a thread that was bound to break. "I married you because I needed a wife," Ethan said. "That part is the truth. But I want you to stay because—" He paused and started over. "Because you put things right that I could not fix. Because you figured out how to saddle Belle in 3 weeks and you never gave up when the buckles were giving you trouble. Because you sit out on that porch with me every single evening, and you do not feel the need to fill the quiet with a bunch of empty words." He held out the ring, not shoving it at her, just offering it there in his open hand, waiting. "Whatever your daddy did, that ain't on you," he said. "I do not give a damn what Cartwright says. I do not care what the bank thinks or what folks in town whisper when we ride by. My ranch is not so weak that it will fall apart just because some banker has a mean streak." She looked from the ring to his hand, calloused and sure, holding it out to her like it was the most precious thing in the world. "I was going to steal your horse," she whispered. "My hand was on the bridle. I was going to take Belle and just ride away. But you did not." "No. Why not?" She thought back to the stable. The exact moment her fingers had frozen on the worn leather, the words that had come up from somewhere deep inside her. "Because I am not him." The words felt stronger this time. "I am not my father. I could not take something that was not mine to take." Ethan nodded slowly. He reached over and took her hand, her left one, the one that was still bare and pale where the ring used to be, and he held it tight between both of his. "The way I figure it," he said, "family is not about one person shouldering the whole load while the other one just stands there and watches. It is about 2 people making the choice to stay every single day, especially when staying is the hardest thing in the world to do." He slid the ring back onto her finger. It fit just like it had before. It was warm from being in his pocket, a snug fit against her skin. But this time it felt brand new. This time she was not accepting it because she had nowhere else to go. This time she was choosing it. "Will you stay?" he asked. The question just hung there in the quiet between them. Behind her, the town was starting to wake up for real. More doors were opening, more voices drifted on the air, and she could hear the far-off sound of the general store's shutters being thrown open. The stagecoach would be here in a few hours. She could still be on it. She could still be gone. She looked at Ethan, at his unshaven jaw and the worry in his eyes, at the shirt that was dusty from riding so hard to find her, and at the hand that was still holding hers like he never planned on letting go. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." They rode back to the ranch together. Ethan had brought his mare, so Abigail sat behind him on the saddle with her arms wrapped around his middle. Her cheek was pressed against his back. The horse kept an easy pace, no longer in a hurry now that the pursuit was done. With every mile, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist and warming the mud-stiffened cloth of her dress until it started to soften up. She did not say a word, and neither did he, but the quiet between them felt different now. It was not the cautious silence of two strangers living under the same roof anymore, but something deeper, more solid. It was the kind of quiet that settles between two folks who have said everything that needed to be said and are just plain comfortable with what is left. The ranch came into view over the top of the last hill. The house and the barn looked sturdy against the bright blue sky. A thin trail of smoke was rising from the kitchen chimney, a sign that the fire she had banked the night before was still going. Everything looked just the same as it had when she slipped away in the dark. And yet, everything looked different. Ethan guided the horse over to the barn, swung himself down, and then helped her down. His hands were steady on her waist, and she let herself lean on him for just a second before her feet touched the ground. "You ought to get cleaned up," he said. His voice was quiet. "Normal. I will get some coffee going." She nodded and walked across the yard to the water pump next to the back door. She worked the handle until a stream of cold water came gushing out. She caught it in her cupped hands and splashed her face, feeling the mud break apart and run in dark streams down her neck. She pumped again and again, scrubbing her cheeks, her forehead, and her hair, until the water finally ran clear and her skin was stinging from the cold. Her dress was a lost cause. She went to her room, which was still her room after everything, and changed into her Sunday dress with the pearl buttons. It was the one he had bought for her in town, the one she had left hanging when she tried to run away. When she walked into the kitchen, he was standing by the stove watching the coffee pot. 2 tin cups were already sitting on the table. The letter she had written was gone. "Porch?" he asked. "Porch." They took their cups outside and sat down in the rocking chairs, the same ones where they had spent so many evenings before. The sun was higher now, warm enough to chase the last of the chill out of the air. The yard stretched out in front of them, looking familiar and peaceful. It looked like home. Abigail took a slow sip of her coffee. The coffee was potent, just how he always brewed it, so bitter it almost brought tears to her eyes. She drank it down all the same. "Why in the world didn't you tell me?" The question just tumbled out of her mouth. "If you knew the whole time, why did you keep it to yourself?" Ethan just rocked his chair, nice and easy, gazing out at the pasture where the cattle were grazing in the new morning light. A good long while passed by before he finally spoke. Because there is a big difference between knowing something and believing it. His voice was low and thoughtful. "I could have told you that your daddy's sins didn't mean a thing to me. I could have said those words every single day for a month straight. But you wouldn't have believed it. You would have figured I was just trying to be nice, or that I didn't truly get it, or that one day it would all sink in and I would change my mind." He turned to her then, and his eyes were as steady and gray as an old fence post. "You had to see for yourself that you weren't breaking anything here. You had to wake up each morning and find that everything was still holding together. You had to go over my account books and mend my fences and sit out on this porch, and finally understand that nothing fell to pieces just because you were here." She twisted the ring on her finger. The garnet stone caught a ray of sun. It glowed a deep red for a second, then went dim again. "I wasted 5 years of my life thinking I was cursed," she said it plain, "that anywhere I settled, I brought nothing but ruin. That my father's shame was my burden to carry. That is a heavy load for anyone to bear. It surely is. Are you ready to put it down now?" She looked right at him, at his face that needed a shave. His shirt was all rumpled, and his hands were wrapped around a tin coffee cup, like he was holding on for dear life. He was not a handsome man, not in the way men in storybooks are handsome, but he was real as the dirt under her feet. He had ridden hard to get her back, and now he just sat there next to her like he had all the time in the world. "I am not my father's ghost, Ethan." The words came out firm and sure. She had never said them before, not to a single soul, not even in her own head. But they were the gospel truth. She knew it now. He gave a slow nod. "No, ma'am. You are my wife." That one sentence just hung there in the air, between them. Simple and solid as an oak tree. It was not just a business deal anymore. Not just a signature on a piece of paper or a name in the bank's files. It was something else entirely, something that was chosen. "The way I see it," Ethan said, "family is not one person pulling the whole weight while the other one just stands by and watches. It is two people making the choice to stay every single day, even on the days when staying is the hardest thing to do." She reached out her hand. It found his on the arm of the rocking chair, and she took hold of it. His palm felt rough and calloused, warm from the coffee cup. She held it like she never planned on letting go. Neither one of them made a move to go inside. The coffee in their cups grew cold. The sun climbed up higher in the sky. Somewhere out behind the barn, a rooster crowed, and the cattle started to stir in the pasture, and the day began to unfold around them, perfectly ordinary, perfectly normal, full of all the little jobs that needed doing. Later on, there would be chores. The horses would need their feed. The fence line in the north pasture would need to be checked. The ledger book needed to be updated with the $47 the bank still owed them. Later, Cartwright might just ride back into town, and they would have to deal with him together. And there would be some difficult talks, and even more difficult decisions, and a future that no one on this earth could predict. But all that was for later. Right now, there was just this. Two people sitting on a porch, holding hands in the morning sun, watching the ranch slowly come to life all around them. Abigail took a deep breath. The air smelled of coffee and horses, and that clean Texas dust in the summertime. It smelled like something she had nearly allowed herself to forget even existed. It smelled like she was home. "I probably ought to go feed Belle," she said. "There is no hurry. That fence will still be there in an hour." She glanced over at him. He was just watching the pasture. A small smile was playing at the corner of his mouth. She had never seen him smile before. It changed his entire face, softened it up, and made him look younger than his 32 years. "All right then," she said. 1 hour. They sat there. The rocking chairs creaked back and forth, finding the same easy rhythm. The sun rose higher and higher, burning away the last little bit of the night's chill. And the whole day stretched out in front of them, with no hurry and full of promise. The ring on her finger caught the sunlight. She looked at it, really looked at it, for the first time since Ethan had slipped it back on her hand at the edge of town. The gold was worn down smooth from all the years his mother had worn it. The garnet was just a small, plain-looking thing, a little chip of red in a simple setting. But it fit. It had always fit her perfectly. She just had not let herself believe it was true. She lifted his hand up to her lips and pressed a small kiss to his knuckles. His skin was rough against her mouth, and it tasted of dust and salt and coffee. He turned his head, surprised by the gesture, and she met his gaze. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to get me. I will always come and get you." His voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "As long as you want me to." She laced her fingers right through his and settled back down in her chair. The rocker groaned a little bit underneath her. The coffee was completely cold by now, but she did not make a move to go get a refill. There was no need to rush anymore. There was only this moment, this porch, this morning, this man sitting beside her, who had chosen her, not in spite of her past, but because he knew all of it. The marriage that had started out of pure desperation had turned into something else altogether. It was not perfect, and it was not easy, but it was hers. And for the first time in 5 long years, Abigail Walker let herself believe that she might just deserve it. You know, a story like this one leaves a certain kind of quiet in its wake. Something gentle, maybe a little heavy, that sits in your chest like an old memory you have not thought about for years. That is perfectly all right. It does not need a label. So many of us have carried burdens we did not choose, the weight of mistakes made by someone else, the shadow of a name that we never earned. Some of us have walked into rooms and wondered if we even belonged there, or we have loved people who never had a clue how much courage it took for us just to stay. Maybe you have been holding on to something quietly for so long that you forgot you were even holding it. This story does not have to teach you a single thing. It does not need to be all figured out or understood. Some things just are, like the way Abigail stood at that gate, the way Ethan rode out after her in the early morning light, the way 2 people made a choice to stay when staying was the most difficult thing they could do. It is okay to just let it rest right there. Not every single ending needs to be wrapped up in a neat little bow. Sometimes the most honest thing is just to sit for a spell with what is left. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for listening to the very end. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.